see up there, question 1, and we'll ask each of the panellists to answer these questions. How can libraries develop and improve our programs and services to better meet the needs of our Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities? Who'd like to go first? I'll hand the microphone here and then you can sort it out.
I'm going to be lucky. And I've taken a lot of notes because I have a lot to say and I wanted to make sure that I refined it. So thank you, Robert, and thanks for having us here. I guess in my contribution here tonight and to ALIA members, you would have heard from my introduction that I have a new role as cultural and critical archivist. So I guess I wanted to continue that theme of being a critic. To perhaps give some alternative and transformative views of libraries. So excuse me while I indulge in that a little bit. So I thought for this question that I would answer this in 2 parts, in terms of how we can bring other, how libraries and other information institutions can improve programs and services. And I think the first thing I thought of was my own experiences of starting a cadetship. There are simple things, there are effective things that we can do to get pathways for people to come in. But I think when I was thinking about this question, I really wanted to note at this forum that I think we're at a crisis point in terms of Indigenous employment, in particular in New South Wales. Drawing on the period of being at the State Library, we undertook research which was, the data collection wasn't brilliant at the time, and Robert was involved in some of the conversations. And basically what we uncovered in that time was that in 2005 there were 10 Aboriginal people employed in New South Wales public libraries, and in 2015 that reduced to 5. So when I look at this question, and thinking about attracting more people, I think that we need to start to think about this in terms of crisis and urgency to attract new people. Now, the other thing that I wanted to say is from my experiences being in the sector for 20 years that being an Indigenous person in libraries isn't always a pleasant place to be. You're often thrown in the front line to solve problems, you don't have support, and cultural safety is not a huge consideration. So when I was thinking about the idea of what more can ALIA do, I was thinking more around the lines of what has been done. And I looked at the page and there's a list of things that ALIA has contributed to. But I think a good starting point is looking at what has and what hasn't worked. What's the evidence base? Has the position statement actually brought any action? Did the endorsement of the ancillary protocols make any change or impact? Or did it inspire purposeful action? I think that we need to do a lot of work on data around employment. I was in a forum in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago and we were talking about the underpayment of Indigenous people in the sector. So when I'm talking about employment, I think we need to have a real look at the levels that people are at and look at what expertise and roles are there around Indigenous engagement. I think we need to move from a deficit approach around issues. When I read the ALIA page, we're looking back at a time and everything that is Indigenous is framed in issues and deficit framework. And we need to acknowledge that Indigenous and Western views in libraries can operate very differently. And I'm sure that Shannon will have a lot to say about that. I think when I reflect on this, that current library practice isn't developed or informed by any Indigenous frameworks, and if it is, it's an add-on rather than a ground-up approach. So I was thinking about this in terms of what would an Aboriginal library look like? Conceptually, what would that be? How would people experience it? And what services, collections would it have when people came in? So how would we approach a library that was co-designed, that was participatory, rather than looking at library services now and plonking them onto an Aboriginal context?
9 months, I think, 8 months. So a lot of what I speak about probably comes from a previous context in Western Sydney, because that's what we're at, a lot of experience with other sort of stuff. When you look at how to make a library programs and services that are neat, one of the things that really became apparent to me when I worked at Western City was because we spanned across, I think it would be 9 different communities of the spread of that university, is the concept of engagement and actually listening and time. And I think that's actually a big problem in our profession, to be actually efficient for our own good. We don't give the time to think and things out properly, and actually engage with people and actually do that concept of co-creation properly. So that's a sort of overarching statement. Interestingly enough, before coming in today, I was doing some digging around in my office of things that people handed me. UTS Library did a study at the end of last year into how to make the library more accessible. And actually, UTS Library is probably one of the more leading libraries in the sector because there's already initiatives in place. So it does actually acknowledge country when you walk in. It actually is branded on the outside. We have like comments actually at our entrance. Our first floor is actually being designed around creating spaces for people to engage in community. So there's a lot of work being done around that. Last year we actually had a lot of engagement that we do in programs specifically for demystifying the library for people in communities. So we have a lot of high school engagement programs that we do. We also run specific sort of things on request for people to enroll in and do some work. We also work very closely with researchers. A couple of staff here doing some work at the moment in this space. So it was really interesting because we are consciously trying, but then yesterday I was having a meeting with a few of my colleagues who are here from around Australia and having a chat, and they have a very different experience. One of them said that actually in the recent survey that they did of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in student cohorts in a university in Melbourne, one of the schools they actually saw libraries being unsafe, which was really interesting. And that came through with a few of my colleagues seeing it actually in an unsafe space, which was different to my experience here, and different, I guess, to where I used to be. But I guess, as I said, let's go back to the question, time. I mean, that's one thing. Give things time, things do it properly, design things properly. That's a great way to do it.
Okay, so where do we start? My experience has been based in primarily the silencing and erasure of my family's culture. We're Sydney-based people. We've always been here since the beginning of time. People have no idea we're still here. When I pick up books in the library, they say the Dharawal people of Sydney are extinct. And they say things like we either need saving or we don't exist anymore. So I find libraries extremely culturally unsafe, and when I find that in a section that might say Aboriginal Australia, probably 90% of the resources there are not written by Aboriginal people. And I think that's a really, really big problem. I know my own experience here and in other places, other libraries and other learning facilities, there's a lot of very recent current publications that are available. I think connecting to the communities within you and around you is really vital in finding out what do people want. If somebody came to Centre for the Advancement of Indigenous Knowledge, Cape, where I sit every day, and said, what would you want to see in the library? I'd say, see all these books in our Cape library? I'd want to see all those books in a library before I would take that library seriously and before I would feel safe walking up to that Aboriginal Australia section and engaging in the books that are there. Most of them are very, engaging colonial discourses, talking all about the deficits of the Aboriginal problem, and it's very culturally unsafe. I feel that, myself and my family, we're very visual people. We need to walk in and see a strong presence. So that's number one for me. And I don't think it should be NAIDOC Week. I think it should be Reconciliation Week, NAIDOC Day, and have a display and have all your Aboriginal books out. Why aren't they out every day? Why aren't they out all the time? Why isn't there a display there every day of the week in the country that this culture arises from? It shouldn't be a special event or program. It should be every day embedded in everything that an Australian institution does. It should not be a special tack-on thing for a special day of the year or the week or month. So they're the kinds of things I think about when I ask that question, when I think about that question, how can they improve their programs and services? Number one, always connect to the community. And that's not just one body within your community, because when you're within a large institution, a large organisation, you'll have pockets of Aboriginal people working throughout. So you don't sort of just go to the overarching body or to what might be the cultural leaders of that body. Go to the students, the undergrads, the research students. Talk to as many different people as you can to figure out what do people want to see in the space that you're in control of, and what do they need there to make it accessible for them. And I think in positions of power that you'll find non-Indigenous people will be in Australia, that it's up to non-Indigenous people to go to Indigenous people and make sure they, as the non-Indigenous people, are doing the right thing by the Indigenous people. It's time for everything to turn around. We no longer want to be just included in things, we want to be the thing, yeah? I hope that I can be understood when I say that, but you really need to, if I see any problems or issues in engaging in something or wanting to be somewhere, whether it's a library or a learning institution, I immediately think, where's their community? Where's the people around them? Who's talking to them? Who are they connecting to? Maybe not connecting to anybody. Connection to community is 150% the success of any of these questions.
Okay, thanks panellists for those responses. For the audience, you will get an opportunity to ask any questions, so write them down. We want plenty of questions. I don't know if you nominate people to be asking questions. Question 2. In what ways can libraries and other information professions attract more people from an Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander background to work in our sector? And that goes to what each of you have spoken about in your first response. So it'd be interesting to hear if you've got any ideas about how libraries can be helped.
I could probably speak about the wrong things. I'll go back to the time thing. I used to be in charge of actually a cadetship program in my old library, and I learned how not to do things, having gone through a number of cadets. And it wasn't bad, they're good things, but it's actually from those experiences I probably learned the most. The first one was patience time. It's actually giving me time to understand it and me taking the time to pay attention. And it's that efficiency thing, like, it might be really quick to do A-to-B, but it might not be the right thing. So giving this the right thing time to do. Giving meaningful employment. I mean, when I walked in the cadetship program, I was opening boxes. And it was probably the worst thing you could give someone to do in the library context, but it was, this is how an entry-level position. And we ended up changing that and trying to support that in different ways. Completely reskirt that job. That was actually the first cadetship program I walked into was that, which is we had staff on the opening boxes and we sort of, it was awful. I mean, I couldn't imagine that anyone doing that sort of thing. And I guess the other one is actually not making any of the work seem tokenistic or something special. It should actually be best practice that we all do. It shouldn't be sort of, we'll put you in this sort of corner and you'll do this because that's a view that you bring. It should actually be how do we integrate it into everything we do. And I think that's actually best practice. And I learned that particularly just before coming in and doing research to other stuff that there's, what is right should actually be what best practice is for everyone.
So I was probably the cadet that Michael employed, but I started around. So I came into the library and archive field through a cadetship that was basically Alia had funding at the time from DETCHA, so it's going back quite a way. After the Reading Home Report, when there was recognition there weren't enough people in both libraries and archives to basically have a service role and engagement in a reading room context. There were a lot of people who I acknowledged established those cadetships with good intention, At the time, I think in the late 90s, we all knew each other. I ran into the person who got the job at National Library in Perth probably 15 years later, and they escaped. So they were the person that was probably put with the boxes. Things have changed now at the National Library. But I think my experience with the cadetship was tokenistic. It was, again, very well intentioned, but I was basically there to solve all the problems that were Aboriginal. That was in the late 1990s, and that scenario, I think, continues. And my colleagues who are here from the State Library know that in all the transformation that we worked on with Indigenous services, we were still being asked if we could photocopy pages that had the word Aboriginal in there. So while we were running to build priorities and self-determination, we were then working with other people to say, hey, do you think that you can copy that page? And again, it was people who, I think, for fear of getting things wrong, thought that we had to be the people that were providing that outlet and that connection. And in many cases, that was to non-Indigenous researchers. So, in that conversation, and I'm going to go back to my notes, I think the idea of attracting people is that we have to change the courses. I think even the scenario of, what would be the good job for an Aboriginal person, we need to start thinking about the vibrancy of what's happening in community contexts, the needs that are actually real, that exist around information and access to information. In the scenario of the State Library and going out to the many public libraries and talking to people about Indigenous needs, often people would know of the communities that had the sideline project happening because there was an amazing person in there kind of nutting away and bringing community in. And everything is basically through people power. So if there's an amazing person in Gilgandra or in Moree or in Walgett, thinking on the northwest, but all of the service provision was actually driven by people. So I think we need to change that. We need to look at the courses. We need to really teach people what that scenario at the State Library of having to photocopy a page. We were having to deal with really complex issues about colonial material, things that needed our investment and time to work with the community, but we were being distracted from those priorities. So we need to build competency, and I know that the National State Libraries of Australasia have a whole piece of work coming out around cultural competency, which is fantastic. And I think it's great that Lyndall is talking about the Year of Indigenous Matters in that regard as well. The Excellent Protocols are there. Alex in the room was one of the leaders of that work in 1995. It's 23 years later. And you talk to people, do you know the Excellent Protocols? Have you implemented them? I think a lot of people have endorsed them, but they haven't actually done the work to make that happen. So I think we need to have a look at that question of attracting people. I don't know that this is necessarily in the state that we're in, the place that we want to bring Aboriginal people into to face the cadetship challenge. We really need to look at, and I think it's a flipping of all of that to think, how can Aboriginal people help the library sector? I think it's actually in places like Walgett, where always talk about Walgett for some reason, but it's so profoundly, it moves you that in that town there's the police station, the courthouse, which is really large, there's the local shop, the banks, and the libraries there. So we really should be thinking about that concept of Aboriginal libraries rather than us trying to get people into the sector in different ways. It really needs to be a partnership model.
I believe it comes down, any sort of employment with Aboriginal people, it should always be taken into consideration that when you hire somebody who's Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander, they come with a very unique and very specific skill set and knowledge base that you can't just find anywhere, and that should be valued. It shouldn't be left photocopying, and it shouldn't be paid either at the same rate as somebody who does not bring a unique skill set and knowledge base. It's not that I'm sitting here saying we should all be paid well above everybody else, but there's been too many positions that I've been in, especially in government institutions, where you're hired as a part of a pool, You tick their boxes because they need to hire a certain percentage of Aboriginal people, so their box has been ticked. But I'm being paid at the same rate as the person next to me who does not come with 45 years and 80,000 years of family history, story, knowledge, information, and everything else that goes with it. So I think we really have to acknowledge that there is something very specific and unique that comes in the skill set and the knowledge base of an Aboriginal employee within particularly learning institutions, and particularly now in this day and age, not so much when I was younger or back in the 90s, but definitely in this day and age people are realising that Aboriginal people and Aboriginal programs and Aboriginal knowledge and skills are very unique and are very commercialised and can very much be exploited. So I really think that people need to acknowledge the value of having an Aboriginal employee to be in amongst their pool of workers is not my privilege, it's theirs. So that needs to be acknowledged and that needs to be valued in a monetary way, in the ways in which the colonial Eurocentric system of value works. So until that point, I'm not 100% sure how well this whole let's make sure we're recruiting a lot of Aboriginal people and let's get everybody in working. So there's just not enough value placed on who we are as a people and race and the base of knowledge at all. So not everybody unfortunately will come together and listen to a panel of Aboriginal people talk. They think we don't have much to offer. They think that it's our privilege to be bestowed a job. When really it usually turns out the other way around. That's what I've always found in my experience anyway.
Number 3, what kinds of programs or policies might advocates advance, or have you experienced programs or policies that have made a difference for you?
Programs and policies, eh? Good difference or bad difference? Because that can make a big difference. Whenever I think of policy, I think of government policies, and usually goes hand in hand with words like assimilation and genocide. But policies that have made a difference in education, I cannot help but notice how incredibly different things are and how rapidly things are changing because of ACARA, because of the mandatory, we need now to have Indigenous perspective throughout every subject. And it's mandatory and it's being measured and it's being taken care of and catered for within schools. It's not easy, it's difficult. We've got teachers sometimes taking 2 steps back and no steps forward. But policy like that is what is going to change. Unfortunately, we are at a stage where people have to be forced to engage in Indigenous knowledges and stories. So the government needs to force things, institutions need to force things, whether it's cultural competency training, which there's some fantastic programs running out there free online, and they're amazing. And I think every single person in Australia should have to do it, have a stamp put on their passport or something, I don't know, on their Medicare card, to say I have done my cultural competency training, because I'm tired of being everyone's teachable moment, and as I'm sure a lot of Aboriginal people are. It's okay, I don't mind answering questions and teaching, but it's time now, there's a lot of information out there, and it's time now that these particular situations are now made mandatory and embedded into policy, because it's the only way things are getting done is to force people to do them. Yeah, there's too many people out there who, once again, are not wonderfully like-minded and engaged, like this audience here, but they think that, oh, what do I need to know Indigenous perspectives? So I've got no Aboriginal kids in my class, or we don't have Aboriginal visitors to our library. Why do we need to worry about an Indigenous perspective in this space? You don't know who's in your library, you don't know who wants to come to your library who isn't coming. And so I think everybody needs to engage and be forced to engage now. I think that's where we're at, unfortunately. But it is making a difference in some areas.
So one thing that although I like to be a critic, I also think that Australia has a lot to be proud of in terms of what we've done here. I just got back from the Society of American Archivists conference where they just endorsed the Native American Protocols for Archives. And my colleagues and I went over to a paper on cultural safety in libraries and archives and talked to our colleagues in the States about, what's next for you, because we, again, with Alex's work, in 1995 this work was done here. And I think looking at that moment in the States of, libraries and archives talking about, the library context, access for all, I think sometimes that can be a mantra rather than a reality, but I think there's a lot of goodwill in our professions, both within ALIA and the Australian Society of Archivists, to do this work and to build priorities. I have a prop here, which I asked colleagues from the State Library to bring along if I could talk about one thing that I feel really proud of, and I'm sure everyone, including Robert at the State Library, we launched this strategy called Indigenous Spaces in Library Places, building a vibrant public library network inclusive of Indigenous peoples and communities. And this was basically a start to say to people who, acknowledging that there's a lot of fear and inertia around where to act. Am I going to get it wrong? This is a strategy that actually says start small, start big, get your leadership role in, advocate in your local council to have someone who's, working to the CEO to set strategy, which is what we see in New Zealand. But this can also be the gestural stuff of print out the poster from the toolkit and acknowledge local people. Do a drive of library cards. Like, do you not actually know if Aboriginal people in the community have a library card? Start to build that visibility, because I think at the end of the day, one of the challenges in libraries is that people in archives, people want to be represented. So if you're not represented, you won't go in. Or if you look at the library shelf and you see those books, then it's not a place for you. So I think there's gestural stuff, there's serious stuff that needs to happen. But if you can look at this strategy, I think what we saw when we did the research for this is that there's actually really good work happening, but people aren't talking about it. So what we were hoping, and I hope for the sector widely, is if people are doing good work, then celebrate it, share it, flip that deficit model so that people can actually, and I know again, when talking about the UTS library, there's great stuff happening here, so make that visible. The other thing that I wanted to share is that idea of how we build self-determination in this space. And I know that I keep referring to Alex in this context, but there are people who have forged places. And if you can indulge me for a second, Alex, in talking about what you've done in terms of the IFLA experience. Alex established the first Indigenous section internationally. He established the ATCEDA project at UTS Library at a time when people weren't doing this, and across the Nesla Library Network at the State Library. And the reason that I wanted to mention that is I think all of us have capacity in our own roles, in our own ways, to open up spaces where Aboriginal people can come in and do what we need to do. And I really wanted to acknowledge Alex tonight for doing that for so many of us, and kind of creating the space and then saying, okay, let's go for it. And I think at an international level now with IFLA, the section now exists. It used to be a special interest group. So they're the things that we need to look at. If you are in a decision-making place, what can you do to actually facilitate change?
I'll probably move to a different context, so probably university libraries. The one thing that at the moment is probably open access agenda, or the open data agenda, which is actually bringing this all to the fore. A lot of issues, and it's a good thing because it's causing people to think. And I remember mentioning this today. I was writing a response to a document, and actually, made a claim that it was all based on a very Western view and treating research data. And all I had to do was literally Google, and you could find hundreds of documents that actually said this is not the way you treat this sort of stuff. So I think that is, and my network of colleagues is actually quite a few. I'm not the only one who's passionate about these sorts of things. There's actually a few of us across the country that actually get together and trying to sort of raise the profile of what best practice looks like. and how we do that. So I actually think the open access, the open data agenda, at least in the university sector, will sort of hopefully drive some change. So at least some thinking and raising sort of profile of libraries need to be a bit more active in this space.
Okay, and the final question we have for our panellists before we move to some questions from the audience is, what are some of the personal experiences or compelling arguments that have influenced your thinking and have motivated you to get involved in being an advocate for change? And you've got a microphone, person that might be using.
I haven't had a choice in taking a leadership role. I think, you know, for the network of Aboriginal people that work in libraries and archives, there haven't been a lot of us. A lot of people have left through burnout, but I guess for me, because I've been in a lot of identified positions, I've felt a real sense of obligation to do something. At the moment, my motivation is in looking seriously at the lack of Indigenous perspectives, both in theory and practice, around the space and the discipline of libraries and archives. I'm kind of motivated as well by networks, and I think tonight's a great example of where things can change a little. We recently here at UTS launched a network called the Indigenous Archives Collective, and the conversations that we're aiming to have in the collective crosses, we're looking broadly at the land sector, but again, it's probably an opportunity for us to give voice to people who are at the front line and they're changing practice, they're changing the way that things work, but they don't have visibility. So that excites me. We're also doing a lot of work here at UTS internationally and connecting with other Indigenous people to see what similarities and differences we have in an international context. So I'm very motivated and nourished by that. We're looking at the software out of Washington State University called Muktu to see what we can leverage and what interest we can get through community engagement in people curating their own content. And that would be a great possibility both in academic libraries around dissemination of research data through to local studies and archives. But I think most of all, in terms of me being motivated to change, when I used to be on the reading room desk at State Archives, a lot of elders used to come in and say to me, you know, particularly when there were collection guides that said things like blacks, they would kind of cheekily smile and say to me, it's your turn to change this. So I think I've always kept their spirit, and people who engaged in really traumatic and complex spaces with me, that we really have to make a difference. And I think, you know, I'm always ranting on about how libraries and archives can be huge facilitators in reconciliation, and they can be, but we really need to look at that partnership model and have the dialogue to get that right.
I'm here, and in a leadership role in many different capacities through many different educational institutions and all sorts of different places, based primarily off the blood, sweat, tears, hard work, courage and bravery of my family and my ancestors. I'm not here because the government has privileged me or because institutions have recognised I might give them a good reputation or tick one of their boxes. I'm here of the blood, sweat and tears of my family, but also my family of Indigenous scholars around me, the academics around me, and the people who fight tooth and nail for money, for grants. They are completely and utterly, unflinching in their dedication to making sure that our voices are heard and that we are heard. And I want to be that for the next generation. I experienced so much loss and erasure through my childhood years and through my early adult years, and I saw how quickly knowledge can fade and slip away. And I saw how stories can just be washed away in time. And I want to desperately make sure that nothing else is lost or erased or silenced or gone. I need to be that person that sits in the middle and makes sure there's something for the next generation, because otherwise it's all gone, there's nothing left. So that is what drives me to teach people, to teach them how to incorporate Indigenous perspectives in their places, their spaces of learning, and whether it's archives or books or reading and writing children and everything. Wherever I can, I will use my stories to make sure that there's a difference made in every individual that I encounter, hopefully. So that's what really propels me in any space at all, and what makes me want to do what I do. And I see in people who want to take that on, I see and I recognise in their faces that same level of loss and devastation, that they don't understand and know their own country's culture and history and knowledges. And I've always said that colonisation doesn't just rob the Indigenous people of space, it robs everybody, every single person. And the loss that the entire Australian culture has suffered at the hands of colonisation, at the hands of trying to erase Indigenous voices and perspectives and culture from our history books, but also from our everyday life, is devastating. It's a loss that we all need to now restore before it goes any further. And it's definitely at a stage where it can be stopped. It's not too late. I think that's what everyone needs to remember, wherever they are in any space, it's not too big a job and it's not too late. It can be done. And I've seen so many great people do it so very, very well.
I have one experience I talk about. I guess where my understanding grew started with a big clean-up of a library. So we were cleaning a library, so we were closing one down. And I found a box of tapes, and all it said was extinct languages on the outside of it. And that actually, interestingly enough, and it was about finding collections that we could digitise as part of a national program and all these sorts of things. That actually led on a multi-year path down, which actually one of the key motivating reasons I came to UTS. From that, I got involved with PVC at the time. It was a very good friend of mine, Professor Lisa, to try and sort of look at how libraries treat material and how data and research data is treated. And it was really interesting how much it changed my view of everything. It helped me understand the importance of engaging with community, because no decision I could make about those tapes I could do on my own. And I felt the weight of responsibility having those tapes in my office, because it could potentially be extinct. Turns out the tapes were part of a collection that were loaned and left in the library by a researcher who didn't return it to the State Library of South Australia. So they were missing 5 of 15 tapes or something, so we had the other 5. But that was really interesting, because I felt the weight of responsibility, and I felt that I needed to do something about this. And I really appreciate Lisa's guidance and everything, and to this day we're really friends. And she actually really helped me understand how it is that that material, while we were doing a bunch of tapes, what that actually meant and how much more was in that box than I realised. Which ultimately got me this whole interest in research data and all these sorts of things, which and things like at sea are actually one of the main reasons I came across UTS, because it was opportunity to make a difference. And it's something I drive with my colleagues, because I am conscious that I'm in a profession where a lot of people are retiring, and we are losing a lot of that knowledge. People like Alex, who retired, take a lot of that sort of knowledge with them. So I'm very conscious that working with my colleagues, especially we all want to see it, sort of understanding that we have a responsibility. And Lisa says to me all the time, we all can change the industry, not one of us. She said we can make it better, but we have to work together. So it's kind of my experience.
Thank you very much. That was really interesting. I'm actually going to be able to answer a really ignorant question. That's why I'm asking it. One of the things I've always wondered is Indigenous culture in Australia is an oral tradition, as you know, but you were talking so much about archiving. I'm just wondering what issues come up for you when you're archiving things from an oral tradition. How do you work through that?
It's a long, big question. But short answer, I think there's probably two parts to that. One is that we have an archival legacy through the process of colonisation. That a lot of our history is held in archives, and in that tradition, the State Library would have manuscripts, the State Archives would have government records. So that's a matter now of retrieving and revitalising. So a lot of languages projects are now drawing on historic materials for local efforts. So we've probably got that side. I think in any culture, if there's an oral tradition, it exists through that form in any way. But one of the important things is to recognise as well that every culture changes all the time. So in terms of Indigenous culture, stories are being told through animation, through digital forms. So the archive in itself can be all of those things. It doesn't just have to be paper-based. So orality can still be archived and maintained in different ways. But I guess in an Aboriginal context, the kinship systems, all those processes of the right to know, elders knowing material, transmitting stories, people can still be an archive as well as what we conceive as an institution. So it's, I think it's both of those things, drawing on our history that is kept in archives, but also thinking about archives in, part of my PhD is that looking at that idea of the archival multiverse. So the land can be an archive, people can be an archive, and I think that's part of that unpacking of what are the traditional notions of a library and an archive and how do we transform that.
Just on that, one of the things that I came across because we were trying to archive these materials was that concept of context. Because it's not just the language, it's everything around it, it's the community, all of that forms the meaning. And actually our knowledge system would support being able to record that, let alone being able to acknowledge that, it's not owned by one person, and the person who is speaking is not the person who has the rights to be able to sort of reproduce that or send it on to someone. So this is a basic attribution that doesn't recognise context.
I've encountered a small version of that where I've been reading information, and only because I know contextually through my family and through our stories, I could put the two and two together and think, I'm a woman, I shouldn't be reading this. But it's written by a white male anthropologist or ethnographer, and it's out there in the archives, and it's the public knows, and you can go in there and read it whenever you want. But there should perhaps be warnings of this archival information contains information that are of male ceremonies or male stories, and that's about that. There should be warnings, or there should be some sort of I could pick it up and I could see it and I could walk away. But there's going to be a lot of people out there who perhaps don't recognise the sanctity or the secrecy behind some of the information that's out there in ethnographers' notes and in their books and things. So that's a really curly place that I've found myself in, that I thought this is not financially listening or reading this. But that these ethnographers were privy to because they were just basically because they were male. So that's something in archives I think to be considered is what's sacred and what should be. There's some really interesting work in repatriation and renatriation of whether it's archival information or of I can't even remember the word because I hate the word. I hate the word for tools and things. I blank it out of my head. Artifacts, thank you. Because to me, when I think artifacts, archival, historical, traditional, I think it's gone. It's all in the past. And I hate the past tense. If there's any one thing that you can look at and take care of yourselves is never speak in the past tense that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. When I hear people say, well, they used to do this and they used to do that, I just want to self-combust. So that's something that you can always keep in mind. Try not to ever speak in past tense.
That's my 2 cents.
Can I just add something to that? Sorry. Oh, sorry. So my team, some people in my team are currently running a lot of projects with community, and it's about I guess, preserving an artifact, so preserving a painting, but it's actually about preserving the story that goes along with the painting. And the problems that have been encountered include metadata standards and them not being sufficient to actually capture the knowledge. Vocabularies that do not actually fit the purpose for the Aboriginal language, of which there's so many in Australia. So it is a really difficult process to actually get the right vocabs for them. It's a lot of work. And then on top of that, because we live in a digital world and we are making these paintings available on the internet, of which people can take a screenshot, they can do anything. It's actually trying to work out a way to wrap the metadata and wrap the story and the context around the picture. So when it travels around the world and it gets downloaded, the information and story stays alongside it. So it's actually, there's so many different levels to it. It's incredibly difficult, but I know there are lots of little projects happening along with community across Australia. So hopefully it gets
I think that's actually a really important point, because the context actually gives a big meaning, and it's the front end which is as important as how you archive it. So how people will access it now that it's presented becomes the next problem. So it's not bad until you've got to put it and get it in form that we all make it conform to, then we're going to try and make it present in a way that sort of conveys that across.
And I think that
that raises an interesting point too, about if you're archiving something or interpreting something or researching something, you should always do it hand in hand with a base of Aboriginal knowledge. I know through my own family's historical accounts that were written by, explorers, by the first settlers, the Europeans that came. When I read their accounts, I read their journals, I can interpret the information on a completely different level, because they've documented what they've seen, but I can then explain through my family's stories what that means and what that's associated with and why and what time of the year and which animals and which beliefs and which stories and which song. And there's a richness in that you can never get, that you can never understand. I think the archival world, and I think many worlds, have a long way to go, especially in research, in understanding and accepting that a white man's notes written back in 1790 are not more valid than the stories that have come and passed through my family and ended up with me here today. That because they're oral histories, they're somehow devalued. They're not as authentic or as rich or as, I don't know, people just don't want to, if I want to, reference something in some writing, it's not enough to reference somebody. Their oral stories and their oral histories. I have to then back that up with notes and documents from European days. So that's really tricky. And I think combining two layers of stories would be the best way to create a really nice whole, archival package that obviously I can imagine in the world of government funding and whatnot. That's not always going to be the case. But that would be best case scenario, perfect world stuff.
What changes do you think need to be made to the library information archives qualifications? I mean, not, that's a big question, but.
Yeah, I think it's a really hard one. I think we have to go back to basics. We actually, I always, because I've crossed over being with ACEDA, being in an academic library, public libraries, a major research library and archive, and for me it's actually on another level of knowledge and memory keeping, and I appreciate all of the specific attributes and qualities and competencies that you have in each of those sectors, and I think they all interplay and are really important. But when I look at them and in the training that I've had both in postgraduate and master's level, nothing has really worked. Like I basically translate community experience into something that doesn't fit. So I think that's part of really what my PhD process is about as well. Like, we're constantly, and the way that the courses then meet practice is that everyone's being taught something that doesn't, you're kind of going out and you're chasing yourself around and around and you're imposing these systems that don't work. So I think good examples are reading room models. You know, being quiet in the reading room. You know, people don't need to be quiet in a reading room. And I know a university library is very different, and a public library can be noisy, but how do you create spaces for people to operate in a way that makes sense, in groups? The way that people catalogue and describe that whole question of metadata, you know, I think we need to really go back and start to identify community needs rather than so much time I think we waste on, you know, what would be the best way that we could do this, but we need to go and ask the questions and we need to model up from that. But I think some basic things would be around community engagement. I don't know that people know or are often taught in the library course, and we all have to acknowledge that the library sector and archives, it isn't necessarily a diverse sector, even in terms of gender representation. So if we already have issues in terms of diversity, and then we're looking at what engagement looks like, I think if we start talking about what is dialogue, what is listening, that would be a good start to then get back to those questions about change. But it's going to take a lot of people working together to approach this.
For the government to change.
If I can say in the quick sense again, I think earlier with the Year of Indigenous Matters as well, one thing that I looked at in the framing of what the priorities were, you know, I looked at that and thought, is cataloguing the priority? You know, so we need to have conversations about if we've got this long view of transformation, where do we start nutting away at? And again, where's the evidence base of what's happened? Because maybe some of the work has been done, but we're not seeing it.
Sort of agree, kind of has to sort of start from the bottom, and it shouldn't be a module we had at the end. So it should be sort of part of the consideration throughout the course. And I think the accreditation or the sort of the nature of the course is actually quite a powerful tool. I mean, universities are bound to put those things into the way they teach. So I just think if it was to be rebuilt and then done in a different way, it could actually be quite a powerful change that Ali could do. What things you could add, I don't know what you could add, because I don't generally believe that there are things that you tack on to the end. But a reframing of how some of the things are done is probably important.
They've just done that recently. Have you seen the Manning Reader Library? Yeah.
Have you all read the article about the Manning Reader Library that's abolished the decimal?
Yep.
Yeah, how cool is that? The cataloguing in an Indigenous way. I think that's true, not true, and furry things, blind things. I think that's fantastic. So relative. It's a human way. As Bruce Pascoe would say, it's Aboriginalism, which I think is humanism. But yeah, makes sense. It's better than a number. Numbers are hard to remember.
Hi. Could you name a couple of cultural competency courses for freelance? And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about the self-curation software for the chapter.
Free cultural competency, Maria Jichinsky that's sitting down in front of here, was part of a fantastic course online through University of Sydney, the Centre for Indigenous Cultural Competency. That's free, Marika, is that? Yeah.
You can even get a certificate if you want, and that's $60. Is that right?
So University of Sydney has like online free. I think the State Library of New South Wales has used a licensed provider. It's a couple of $100, but you can get accreditation through that. Maybe ask these guys. But the Sydney Uni one is great.
UTS has one too.
UTS has Aboriginal Sydney, and that's it's a course that you can actually do it and get credit points. It's a 1 credit point.
No, it can be done as a 6 credit point or 8 credit points, and as an elective across the university, everyone can do it, and it can be done online. And I think there's a provision where external to UTS people can also do it.
Yes.
Not just UTS.
That's organised and run through the Centre for the Advancement of Indigenous Knowledges, so you can find out through them. And what was the next part of the question?
The software. So with Australia, particularly Australian libraries, have often gone for service providers to to have databases for engagement. So there's been examples in the Northern Territory, in Western Australia and Queensland. It's now called Keeping Cultures, and in terms of the purposes of what people are doing around engagement with images and materials from community and digital repatriation, it's fitted their needs. But what we've been looking at in New South Wales, because of the amount of communities and language groups, is trying to go for a more sustainable approach. So we've been looking at software built out of Washington State University. It was originally built here in Australia by a cultural anthropologist, Dr. Kimberly Christian. She's then taken that back to the US and worked with Native American communities to implement that. It's kind of exciting because it's been really fantastic at getting government grants. It's a grassroots effort, so it's based on building software development and a roadmap for software development based on community feedback and needs. So it's not where it needs to be yet, but I'm excited about it because it's open source and it's community driven. So we're looking at that piece of work here at UTS, and it's about actually getting community involved in curation, so that rather than having the conversation about what do we do with these tapes, you get them digitized and you flip them back and say, here are your tapes, let's work together to do what you need to do with them. So it's a real rethinking in terms of where the resources go as well. There's lots of examples online. Canadian public libraries have been using it around storytelling. You can ask the State Library as well. They're tapped into the network.